Ever wondered if your dream of owning a cozy home is being crushed by Wall Street giants? Well, brace yourself because according to the rumor mill and a bunch of online chatter, it seems like Larry Fink and his buddies at BlackRock, Vanguard, and State Street are on a shopping spree, snatching up a whopping quarter of all single-family homes in the US. Rumor has it they're throwing around cash like confetti and even outbidding regular folks by 50%. But hold on, is this really a hostile takeover or just a complicated real estate tango? Well, let's find out. The investor onslaught in American housing. Back in the aftermath of the big 2008 money mess, investment folks started gobbling up homes left and right. You know, the ones left lonely and foreclosed. Fast forward, and now these big shot investment companies are all about snagging single-family homes with one goal in mind: renting them out and raking in the cash for their investors. Now, I get it. This whole situation deserves a side eye or two, maybe even a raised eyebrow. I mean, there's a housing affordability crisis hitting Americans hard. It's like finding a needle in a haystack to score a decent place without breaking the bank. But here's the kicker. Some folks are taking this whole investor home buying saga and cranking up the drama to a whole new level. Like, seriously over the top. They're not just misreading the stats, they're pointing fingers in the wrong direction. Take, for instance, the claim that BlackRock is out there throwing cash around like confetti, paying 50% more than the asking price to own entire neighborhoods. Turns out, that's a mix-up. The real deal is about Fundrise, a different player in the game snagging a built-for-rent community. And that 50%? It's the builder's profit margin, not some crazy extra cash slapped on the table. Conspiracy theories and confusion. Let's clear up the confusion right off the bat. So, when it comes to this whole buying up houses saga, people are getting a bit mixed up about who's in the ring. BlackRock is like the big kahuna in the asset management game, handling a whopping $10 trillion in client money. Now, there's a whole bunch of conspiracy theories swirling around them, and I guess that's where the confusion kicks in. But hold up, BlackRock isn't the one making it rain on single-family properties. Nope, that's a whole different player called Blackstone. Easy to get them mixed up, I know. BlackRock is more into the stock and index funds scene, and their residential assets, about $120 billion worth, are tied up in mortgages, multifamily properties, and building single-family rentals from scratch. On the flip side, Blackstone is a private equity hotshot, diving deep into alternative assets. They're the ones notorious for scooping up existing single-family homes. Now, here's the kicker. These two companies used to be pals in the 1980s, but they went their separate ways a few years later. Since then, they've been doing their own thing in different corners of the investing world. So, first things first, let's get the names straight before we dive into the nitty-gritty arguments. It's like trying to follow a game with the wrong teams. You're bound to get the plays all mixed up. The true titans of single-family homeownership. Now, let's tackle the next head-scratcher. Blackstone might be making waves, but they're not exactly the kingpins in the single-family homeownership game. The top dogs in this arena are different players. First up, you've got Progress Homes, the brainchild of the private equity whiz kids at Pretium, holding the crown with a whopping 990,000 properties. Talk about real estate royalty. Then there's Invitation Homes, a publicly traded stock with 83,000 properties. And American Homes for Rent, another stock sensation, strutting its stuff with 60,000 single-family properties. Don't forget First Key Homes, flexing with over 50,000 properties, and Amer Group, staking its claim with around 40,000. And where's Blackstone in this lineup? Well, they're in the mix, owning around 25,000 properties. Sure, they used to have a piece of the Invitation Homes pie, but they sold that off in 2019. Now, Blackstone's got its fingers in other pies, investing in companies that also scoop up single-family residences. But here's the plot twist. People seem to be throwing around names like BlackRock, Vanguard, and State Street in this real estate riddle. Sure, these heavyweights hold shares in a bunch of publicly traded stocks, including some in the top 5 players. But here's the kicker. Even if you play detective and estimate their share in the top 5, it doesn't push them into the winner's circle. And get this, there's a silent contender in the shadows that folks aren't buzzing about. Pretium Partners. They're a whole separate private equity crew, not Blackstone, yet they seem to be pulling some serious strings in the single-family homeownership game. Everyone's focused on the wrong player in the spotlight. So let's shuffle the deck and give credit where credit's due. The true influence of investors on US housing. Now, have you ever wondered how many houses these big companies are grabbing up? Well, turns out it's not as crazy as you might think. Out of the 100 million homes in the US, these companies have their hands on only about 0.3%. Yeah, really. According to this cool project about private equity, these investors folks own roughly 350,000 homes nationwide. And get this, that's just around 0.36% of all the houses out there. But wait, another estimate by MetLife throws a different number into the mix, saying it might be more like 0.72%, which is around 700,000 homes. Don't be fooled by the small slice of the pie these guys have. Even though they don't own a massive chunk of the market, their buying spree is still nudging up home prices. According to CoreLogic, a real estate brainiac company, investors have swooped in and bought up about 25% of all single-family homes in the last few years. It's a stat that gets thrown around a lot when people get all worked up about Wall Street taking over houses. But here's the kicker: when we say investors, it's not just those big-shot Wall Street suits. Nope, about half of the action comes from regular folks, the mom-and-pop types. These are individuals or small operations that own between 3 and 9 homes. The big corporations with over 1,000 properties? Well, they only made up about 9% of the buying frenzy a year ago, and now they're at around 2%. Now keep in mind that these numbers are the big picture. But here's the juicy detail. In some parts of the US, these big companies are really making waves. They're influencing property prices and rents in specific pockets around the country. It's like they've found their sweet spots. The Sun Belt's love affair with corporate home buyers. It's kind of wild how these investment folks have a soft spot for the Sun Belt, the southern charm of the US. Last year, Florida, Georgia, Nevada, and Arizona were hotspots for mega investors. They snagged more than 5% of all the single-family homes sold, and Arizona even hit almost 10%. But here's the kicker: those states also saw some crazy spikes in home prices, like 22% to 32% jumps. And rents? Oh boy, they're not lagging. In Phoenix, rent for a 2-bedroom pad shot up by a whopping 43%, Tampa saw 44%, and Atlanta got a 35% boost. Compare that to the national average of just 24% from early 2020 to 2023. Now, I get it. It seems like these big corporate players might be playing a role in the price hike drama. But here's where it gets interesting. Take South Dakota, for example. A 23% jump in home prices, and guess what? No mega corporations swooping in there. It's like, what gives? My point isn't to defend these Wall Street giants. Honestly, I'd rather see regular folks snagging those homes. But there's more to the story. It's not just about these big shots. There's this whole supply and demand thing going on. Demand soaring, but the supply, not so much. So, sure, these big companies might be stirring the pot a bit, but you can't dump all the blame on them, especially when you see places like South Dakota doing their own thing. It's a real estate roller coaster, and we're just trying to figure out who's steering the ship, Here's the scoop: the housing market's been doing a bit of a dance. Just recently, we managed to bounce back from the financial crisis slump. But you know what? The homes they're building now? Not as newbie-friendly. Back in 2019, only 7% of the homes were starter homes. Compare that to the 1980s, where a whopping 40% were. And let's not forget the low interest rates. Those guys played a massive role in making everyone go gaga over real estate during the pandemic. Now, I do think these big corporations stirred the pot in some places. They argue they're helping by building homes for rent, but skeptics say they might be pulling resources away from homes you can actually own. Tricky, right? Local jams and the true players in home buying. Now, there's this rumor that these companies are buying up homes in neighborhoods they already mostly own. Supposedly, they're throwing crazy bids around just to pump up the value of what they got. Haven't seen solid proof, but wouldn't be shocked if it's happening in a few corners of the map. But here's the kicker: even if we kick out all the big shots from Wall Street, we'd only be chopping less than 10% off the investor demand. It's like, sure, it might help a bit in those hotspot areas, but it won't magically fix the whole affordability mess. Oh, and Richard brought up this wild claim from RFK Jr., BlackRock, Vanguard, and State Street. Apparently, they're aiming to own 60% of homes by 2030. Now that's a spicy prediction. What do you make of that? Honestly, I'm a bit lost on where he dug up that stat. I did some snooping around and found this estimate suggesting that by 2030, big money investors might snatch up 40% of all single-family rentals. But here's the kicker, there are around 100 million single-family properties in the US, and these rentals make up just a humble 14 million of the bunch. So, if we do the math dance and keep things steady in 2030, that 40% would only be a tiny 5.6% slice of all the single-family homes in the United States. And sure, there's this looming threat that the proportion might balloon over time, but I'm scratching my head here, trying to square that with the wild claim that 3 companies, who right now aren't even into the whole single-family property game, are gunning for 60% of all homes. Talk about a head-spinning scenario. Let me clear the fog a bit. Yes, there are these Wall Street-backed companies and big players splashing cash on single-family properties. It's causing a stir, especially in those hotspot regions where the property hustle is real. Housing affordability is playing hide-and-seek, no doubt. But to toss the blame on BlackRock, Vanguard, State Street, or any Wall Street big shots for single-handedly jacking up prices nationwide, that's just way too simple. Truth be told, most of this buying frenzy is probably more of a local jam, with regular folks and smaller outfits jumping into the mix. Sure, that's the ideal scenario, but it's a tad tricky for politicians to point fingers at investors as a whole when the real game changers might be just around the block. So, if you're rallying for a cause, get your facts straight, know who's who in the blame game, and then go swinging for the fences. It's the right play if you want to champion the right causes. Enjoyed the content? Don't forget to subscribe and ring that bell to stay updated on all our latest videos.